if we've actually helped them realize the potential of change, because that's the biggest, component of the sales process that we need to help them through, they've got to be committed to change. Because they're not, unless you're selling something transactional, but most of the time, even transactional, but most of the time they're buying change, they're buying the outcome, right? They're buying the future state. And they've got to be committed to change. They've got to be committed to get. This is why so many people drop off from gym memberships. I've done a lot of work in the fitness industry. And the reason why they have a lot of attrition, right? They have a lot of churn because people aren't actually committed to the change that they want to achieve. And so no matter what you do, if they're not committed to it, they're just not going to achieve it.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. Now, that was Luigi Prestinenzi. Luigi's the founder and head of growth at the Sales IQ Group and host of the Sales IQ podcast, of which I've had the pleasure of being a guest. And in this conversation from the archives of the Sales Enablement Podcast, Luigi and I talk about the essential mindsets for sellers. I know, the topic of mindsets can sometimes make your eyes glaze over, but I think it's maybe because you don't fully understand what mindsets are and how important they can be for sellers. I mean, most people think of mindsets as determination or hustle, and yeah, but not completely. I mean, those are really attitudes. Mindsets are sort of the lens or the lenses through which people filter and process how they experience the world. And in this episode, Luigi and I dig into some of the critical mindsets for sellers: growth mindset, open mindset, and a few others. So it's a great conversation, and we get all of that and much, much more. But before we get to Luigi, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast, wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could also give us your feedback about how we're doing. Leave us a review, a rating or review. We'd really appreciate it. So thank you. All right, let's jump into it. Luigi, welcome to the show.
Andy, I'm very excited. I think I said to you before we started recording, I've recorded that many podcasts, but for some reason today I'm nervous.
Hey, you've come to the home of the best conversations in sales, so you got to bring your A game.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to be on the podcast, Andy, and pumped. I've listened to you for such a long time. It's great to be on the other end.
Yeah, well, I was just on your show. That was a great experience. So, as people maybe can guess from listening to it, you're in Australia, Melbourne to be precise. So how are things going? I mean, you guys just sort of came out of an extended lockdown, like about 111 days or something?
Yeah, something ridiculous. It's the longest in the world. A couple of weeks ago. So yeah, it was nearly 5-6 months, maybe longer, but harsh lockdown. So, 5K. Weren't allowed 5Ks away from our house, or a couple of miles, only an hour a day, some very, very strict limits. So it's great to have some form of normality back.
Now, do you live in a house with like a backyard, so it's outdoor space, or are you in an apartment? Or
no, I'm out in the burbs, so lots of space. That's one of the good things about living out here, lots of space. So I made sure that, during, I think, transitions from that working from home is that I found myself working too many hours, Andy. So the breaking up the day and getting out for a run has been really, really important to keep mentally sort of, focused and making sure that I don't spend all my time on Zoom calls.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Very important. So a question for you about Melbourne. That's always sort of fascinating. We didn't talk about the last time, but so Melbourne seems to have this obsession with like really tall apartment buildings. It's like who are they racing against? I remember the Eureka Tower was like the tallest residential tower in the world. And then now they've got one even taller they're opening.
Yeah, it's about to open. That's right. They've even beat the Eureka. I didn't think they could get bigger than the Eureka, but
100 stories. Can you imagine living on the 100th floor of a building? What if the elevators went out?
I know you have to walk, but we've got an obsession with really, really tall apartments, and they're really small. So,
inside they're very small.
Yeah, they're pretty small. Unless you're, unless you got a lot of coin, and you can afford the big lofts.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Think about that. Living 100 floors up. I mean, I live in a high rise, but I'm like on 7th floor. Here in San Diego, in New York, we have one on the 10th floor, but it's like, yeah, I can't imagine being.
I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it.
Well, so I was curious about what the apartments looked like inside. So I was going online and looking for videos to see if anybody had one. They had this interview with this couple that were living with their young son in like the 75th floor of the Eureka Tower. And they said, yeah, a lot of our friends can't come up because they can't. Yeah, they've got vertigo. That's just too severe, even though there's no balcony or anything like that. Just being inside the building is too much for them.
Yeah, it's pretty. And there's an actual, you can go to the top. It's called Eureka Sky Deck. And
with the glass floor that goes out.
Yeah, and it goes out. It goes out, I think, like 4 or 5 meters outside the building.
No, thank you.
And then it's got, and what they do, it's actually pretty cool. The glass goes from frosted glass to clear. And so
while you're standing on it.
Yeah, you're standing on it, and all of a sudden it makes this noise. You hear like a crack, and it makes this noise that it's about to crack, and then it just goes woof, and all of a sudden you're just standing on nothing. 88 floors in the sky. It's actually pretty full on. And I've done it a couple of times, and I did it with a couple of people from Austria, and I'll never forget. Like, she literally clinged onto the side. Yeah, she started freaking out.
I would do the same. I mean, I'm okay at heights when I'm inside a building, but yeah, put me on something like that or like on a cliff edge or something. Yeah, not happy at all. Oi, yeah, I probably would have screamed. All right, so one of the things we were going to talk about is mindset and the importance of mindset in sales. So let's start. Just define for me how you, or what you consider a mindset to be.
Yeah, I think you can look at it in a couple of different aspects, but I think with anything we do in life, mindset plays a crucial role. There's a great book that I read by Dr. Carol Dweck called Mindset.
Mindset, right? Yep.
Incredible book. Talks about the fixed versus growth mindset. And I think with everything, we can often look at things, based on our, previous experiences, and that can impact the way we look at things. And one of the things I loved about my son, Andy, when he was 4 or 5 years old, he's always had this incredible desire to be a footballer. He wants to be a professional footballer. And, from a really early age, he had this thirst and energy for life. Some would say he had ADD, very energetic, jumping around, incredibly energetic. And, I'll never forget, he was lining up for school, and I can remember it like yesterday. And I went to pick him up from school, and you had all the kids, like all the preps lined up, right? They were all looking great. That first day, fresh clothes. All the clothes were big. They were too big. The clothes were too big for them, right? But you could just see a genuine, thirst for learning. You could see a thirst for life, right? And, I'll never forget this, that, I spoke to a couple of his mates that he just met, and the conversation, and little boys, and what do you want to be when you're older? And I want to be a fireman, I want to be an astronaut. And my son, I want to be a footballer. He was absolutely paramount that football was his motivation for life. And then the thing that I find mindset impacts people is as they get older, they get to that time in life that some go, well, I don't know what I want to be when I get older. It's not even about what I want to be when I get older, but they start to see things from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. And I think that happens a lot from my perspective, when I look at sales professionals. Often happens with salespeople. They try something once, or they've done something before, it hasn't worked, and all of a sudden they think, well, that doesn't work, I'm not going to try it again. And they can develop a fixed mindset. So, why do I use the example of a child going to school? Because I think if we all take that mentality of, everything that I'm going to do, I'm going to go in with a thirst for learning and a thirst for that anything's possible, regardless of the previous experiences that we had, our mindset will allow us to capture the full opportunity that's in front of us, right? Yeah, and I think that's from my perspective. I think that's why mindset's so important, because it allows us to be the best we can be, or it can also hold us back. And I know in certain parts of my life, I've got a great mindset with some parts, and then other parts, my mindset's horrible. And then because I say it's horrible, and you know what? It's kind of like I'm feeding the fact that it's horrible, right? So, that's one of the things I think that for me, mindset's just about the way in which we look at things and our ability to look at things with an open and growth focus versus closed.
Yeah. Well, I think there are multiple mindsets in sales, personally. I mean, I think certainly a growth mindset is one, but I agree with you. I think important for people to understand that when academics and so on talk about mindset, it's like a lens to think about service, like a lens through which people filter and process how they experience certain aspects of the world. And one of the best things I'd read about it was to say, well, consider it like a mindset's like a spectrum, 180 degrees from one end to the other. And, you talk about growth and a fixed mindset. So a growth mindset is one in which people see people and themselves, obviously, as being able to change and to learn, as you talked about, to acquire new skills, new talent, and acquire new intelligence, get smarter. Yeah. And the fixed mindset serves the opposite, right? People aren't really able to change. And so you look at it on that spectrum, on one end is growth and on one end is fixed. And we're all sort of somewhere in the middle, right? We're all a mix, sort of like if you have maybe a faucet handle that, one direction's hot and the other direction's cold and you like it just so. Yeah, you're adjusting the mix. And that's, I think with mindset, that's the thing for people really to keep in mind is that very rarely all of one or all of the other is you're some combination, and your goal oftentimes should be is how do I change the mix?
Yeah, absolutely. And how do I try to look at things from a certain perspective? How do I try to just change the way I might be looking at something? Because sometimes it's not, it's just the way that we look at things, and we can see it from a very, very different perspective, right? And we can achieve a different outcome. And I think that's what mindset's all about for me. It's just the way in which I look at things and the way in which, because I know that when I look at something in a certain way, I'm able to achieve a certain outcome. Mm-hmm. Even if I don't achieve the outcome, there's always a positive that I can find from something, right? And so that's what I find that's really interesting about mindset. I find that it can be the best way to create something out of nothing, and it can also be, an incredible hindrance that stops us from moving forward or that prevents us from getting the most out of something.
Right.
And I think from my perspective, Andy, having some health challenges when I was younger, it enabled me to see things from a very, very certain perspective, and allowed me to develop a really, really strong mindset for growth and have a real hunger and thirst for learning. So
what were those challenges?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I haven't really shared this before in my own podcast, but I had cancer when I was younger. So I had Hodgkin's lymphoma, and I had a very tough period in my life where I received chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and it was actually a really challenging experience.
How old were you?
I was 20 years old.
That's sort of the time that can happen for some men.
Yeah, so I was. It was really interesting. I was 20 years old, and I found it very difficult. I found the process very difficult. I found there were some days where I had some very, very dark days. On the steroids, I couldn't sleep. I was.
Steroids are the worst. Steroids are the worst.
It was the worst. There was moments I was in hospital. I was in I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. I couldn't hold anything down.
So you were at university when this happened?
No, I was actually working full time, and then
You're working?
Yeah, and then I went to university as an older age student.
Got it.
Because I struggled at school. School was not my most funnest experience. But then I did decide to go back to uni at 23, and then I went back to uni at 23, and then 3 months into my Bachelor of Marketing, I actually had a semi-relapse. I was in remission, and then I had to leave uni to undercourse another process of treatment. And then it was the gods telling me that maybe university and school was not for me. And,
which you already thought, but if we just need to confirm it, let's give Luigi cancer to bring that lesson home.
Yeah, and so luckily that I was always in sales. It was my first job out of school. I'd done some really cool things in contact centers. When I say cool, I was just good on the phone. I was good at converting. I was good at calling. So I just fell back into a role back in sales, and the rest is history. It was probably.
Well, but how did you, when you came out of that experience, though? I mean, how did you feel different than when you went in terms let's talk about from a mindset perspective. I mean, here you'd had this huge life-threatening event that took course over a couple of years.
Yeah.
And so how do you think it changed you for the better?
I feel it's a really interesting question, Andy. And I think for me, how did it change me for the better? It created a hunger and thirst just to learn and go out there and do something, right? Because I was held back in some capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And being held back, it wasn't because of choice, right? I was held back because of an illness, of having cancer. And coming out of that, it was like, wow, now I'm 24, 25, because it really was a number of years that it kind of changed the course of my life.
So you sort of feel like maybe you're behind a little bit?
Absolutely. I felt big time behind, big time, right? Haven't got the education. What am I going to do? Don't have enough skills. I can sell on the phone, etc. And very different marketplace. The Australian marketplace compared to the US, we view sales very differently, right?
How so?
Well, to some extent, back in, SDRs today is a cool thing, right? Being an SDR, it's kind of like, wow, being an SDR, the sales, outbound, it's kind of become a really cool thing in sales. But telemarketing, what we used to call it when I was on the phone, when I was 18, it was not a cool thing, right?
Intrusive.
Yeah, it was seen as intrusive, entry-level job. Oh, you're in sales? Oh, you're a telemarketer? And it wasn't seen with the most positive of light, and nor did our profession, the industry, give itself the most positive rep either.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I always felt behind, but I was good at it. I was actually really good at it, and I think there's a lot to be said if you can learn how to sell on the phone. And actually, like, I know people, there's always a debate of cold calling, but if you can actually learn how to call somebody at home, a consumer, completely unsolicited, and get them onto a conversation and build some element of level of rapport, and then get them to a point of decision, there's a lot to be learned from that process. And it's not just necessarily about learning about how to convert somebody on the phone. There is an element of mindset that you learn, because I can tell you what, there's a lot of rejection that goes on, not objections, not rejection. There is they swear at you, they hang up on you, you do that, you get 50 hang-ups.
Yeah.
And you build a level of resilience that I think a lot of sales professionals today struggle with, right? And we're told, use LinkedIn, there's all these other channels, but fundamentally there are some basic fundamentals that as a sales professional, if we can develop that foundation, right, that's what we can build a successful career on. And that's why when I look at my career, I think that was a really critical time that at the time I didn't realize how important it was. And then obviously having cancer and being delayed in my career, really created that thirst. And I just wanted to learn, and books were my best friends. Relationship Selling by Jim Cathcart was just an incredible read when I read it back when 19. And The Little Red Book of Selling and the Sales Bible from Jeffrey Gitomer. And then probably one of the best books in my B2B career was Strategic Selling by Miller Hyman. I used that exact book to land my biggest deal at the time, which was nearly $10 million. And it was an awesome book. I still got it. I still reference it. Sure. I still got the highlights.
Yeah, well, it's not outdated. I mean, this is so we'll get back to that part. But I think that what you also, though, when you talk about, you had this hunger to learn and so on, but I think that you also had an advantage,
Mm.
I would imagine, over your peers, job peers, not age peers, that were doing similar work at the time, because you clearly must have developed a level of resilience coming through your cancer treatment that no one else had to experience. I mean, I would imagine that was part of what kept you going.
Yeah, and it also, what it also allowed me to do? It allowed me to see things from a different perspective, and not just perspective as in, it was like more of an age perspective. So when I was talking to C-levels executives, because that's who I was selling to in my mid-20s, I had a level of life experience that my colleagues at 25, 24 didn't have.
Yeah, for sure.
And I was able to have deeper conversations with my customers and my clients and my prospects because I was seeing things from a completely different light, right? I had a young child. I'd already had I had cancer. I had some really challenging times. Like, I'm going to lay it bare. Money was tough, right? We were living week to week. If I didn't get my commission check, I was in a lot of trouble. And so, I was able to have some very deep conversations with my prospects, and it allowed me to build some incredible relationships. I was talking to people in their 40s that were 20 years my senior.
Sure. I would think part of that, though, stemmed from the fact that having gone through what you went through, is that unlike other sort of relatively inexperienced sellers who worry about how the call is going and get nervous, is I imagine you knew what was important, right? I mean, you knew in the grand scheme of things that having that conversation isn't a matter of life and death. You'd already had that situation. So I would think that maybe helped you.
Yeah.
Is being able to have that perspective that, I want to do well here, but if it doesn't happen, that's not the end of the world.
Absolutely. I think that's a great thing. That's what I keep saying. Like, the greatest thing about selling is if one person doesn't buy today, there's another 1,000 people out there tomorrow that you can talk to, right? So it's not like, and that's the abundance mindset. And sometimes I struggle with that too. I think, of late this year, I've really been challenged mentally by everything that's been going on. But one thing that hasn't challenged me is the law of abundance when it comes to sales. Like,
right.
There is just, and the greatest thing about the world right now is there's such a massive market that we never were able to tap into, 20 years ago when I first started, 18 years ago. Is we have an unlimited amount of opportunities out there. So, the reality is success is not about my company or, what my company's doing from a marketing perspective. Success is all about, like, how open am I to go and attract the opportunities that are out there in the market?
Exactly.
They're out there, right? Like, there is literally the world of abundance at the moment.
They've always been there. I early in my sales management career is I developed this, I call it the big world theory. And, I'd have a seller come to me. And at that time, I think I was managing a team of people that were selling overseas and as well. And, they complain. It's like, somebody didn't buy from them or this wasn't going well. And I'd say, let me tell you my big world theory. It's a big world out there. There's lots of other people who don't buy what we sell. Go find one. It's just like, it's always been that way. That's one of the beauties about sales, I think, is that, and this was at a time we were selling to the products we were selling. We figured we had maybe 300 prospects in the world for this satellite communications network we were selling. That's still a lot.
Absolutely.
It's still a lot. So, so that's abundance mindset. That is absolutely an essential part, I think, of sales. The growth mindset we talked about. I think that if you're in sales and you don't think that you have the ability to change your abilities or your skills, then sales is not for you. It's going to be very difficult for you. If you're a sales manager and you don't have a growth mindset, if you don't think that the people that work for you have the ability to change, then you're going to treat them as such. Your feedback is not going to be very good. You're not going to be very effective as a coach because you sort of think to yourself, why bother?
Absolutely. We also create, I think we can also create our own barriers. Like, we can, by saying, we've tried this before, it hasn't worked, or you're right, like a sales manager, they don't like my coaching, or they're not open for X. We're putting it out there that that's going to happen. And I know some people might be rolling their eyes going, oh, here we go. But I think manifesting and what you actually say actually comes to reality. You know, I coach a lot of inside salespeople, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them say, oh, you know, people don't answer the phone. I'm like, well, you're kind of creating that barrier for you. If you're ringing someone with the anticipation that it's going to go to voicemail, expect it to go to voicemail, right? I've done kiosk sales before, right? So literally sitting in a kiosk in a shopping center is a very challenging sales process to execute.
Sure, sure.
And you've got to have like, you know, a mentality of that people want to talk to us, that, you know, we can impact people in a positive way. But if you look at it, I'm about to interrupt someone, then it could possibly become you're going to set the expectation that that's what's going to happen. And I think, you know, that's probably another element of mindset. And, you know, the stuff that I'm talking about is not, you know, stuff that I've created, Andy. It's from the books. Like you look at some of the books like, you know, Og Mandino, the greatest salesman in the world, and Napoleon Hill and Jim Rohn and Earl Nightingale. I mean, these are some concepts that they've talked about, Paul J. Meyer, for you know, over 100 years, right?
Yeah, close to it, Og Mandino, for sure.
Yeah, like there's some stuff out there that, you know, they talked about that is probably even more relevant today than what it was back then, right? And I think, you know, you're right. There is a whole range of different mindset elements of mindset that we can take into different parts of our roles, whether it being sales or management or coaching or marketing.
Well, another example, I think, for sellers is this idea of an open mindset versus a closed mindset. So an open mindset are people who are open to the ideas of others, sort of focusing on finding the truth. Maybe this is really the learning mindset to some degrees. Is this is where the learn it all comes. But they also have some humility, because if you've got an open mindset, since you're open to the ideas of others, you're willing to accept the idea that you could possibly be wrong. Where the closed mindset, I think, is a huge problem in sales, is because it's sellers that think they sort of know it all, or maybe they're overly scripted, which is another version of sort of thinking, you know, I know it all, because they're not interested in exploring beyond the sort of set list of questions or whatever that they do. So I think this idea of open versus closed mindset is another one that's very prevalent in sales and worth thinking about.
Absolutely. And you know what? We've also got to recognize, I think, as an industry, you know, we've actually kind of created a bit of a closed mindset with our buyers. You know, some of the behaviors that we've exhibited as an industry have created that barrier between buyers and the sellers. You know, there's still a lot of data out there about the lack of trust between buyers and sellers.
Sure.
And I think, you know, that's probably the key mindset that we need to be taking in as a sales professional. You know, what are those characteristics and behaviors that we need to exhibit with our prospects and our customers? You know, what is our charter from a selling perspective? You know, how are we going to elevate the position?
That's a huge question. So what is the charter of a salesperson?
It's a really good one. I think, you know, there are certain characteristics and behaviors that we need to exhibit across, you know, across a couple of different things. And I look at it from, you know, relationships are fundamental. And I know that can be debated right now, but, you know, relationships are key. That speed to trust component. If they don't trust us, they're not going to share anything with us, right? So trust is absolutely key. And how do we do that? We've got to have a focus on relationships and building rapport with our prospects. And then looking at about, well, how do we actually create value for them? And what are we prepared to give to them without any expectation of return, right? And so, I mean, you do it with all your content. You give it so much, and Ring DNA, there's so much content available that can help people regardless whether they buy from you or not, right?
Yeah.
And that's paramount, because you're giving stuff, you're helping people with no expectation of return. And then the third element is looking at the partnering for success. So by truly partnering, you know, like not making a sale, because a sale is a single transaction, but it's actually saying, I want to partner with you. I want to help my customers and my prospects be successful over a long period of time. And that might mean that, you know what, we might be talking today and you might not buy from me for a long time, and it's okay, because ultimately, if timing's not right for you, no matter what I do, I can't force you to that point of decision. And if I try to do that, then I'm not helping you choose me, am I? And I think that's the type of mentality that charter It's about going, my role is to help, my role is to guide, my role is to facilitate and help the prospect arrive at a certain decision point.
Right. And I'm glad you came around to that point, because I'm very explicit about that, is I think that this is a huge problem, I believe, in terms of that we set sellers up for failure or for not succeeding to the level they can because they have the wrong perspective about what their job is. Mm-hmm. And you basically said it there, just your last sentence, which your job as a seller is to help your buyer make a purchase decision. Yeah, it's not to get an order. If you go out with the perspective that your motivation is just to get that order, we know it's there in the background. It never completely goes away. But you can help somebody and still have the agenda of wanting to win their business. I mean, Adam Grant in his book Give and Take talks about being a giver with an agenda. That's okay. But the thing that's driving you is, I want to help this customer make a purchase decision.
Absolutely. And, sometimes the decision's not with you. Sometimes, we're not the right person to help the customer.
Sure. And that's fine too.
And that's okay, because you know what? The relationship that you'll build is going to be incredible anyway if you help them, regardless if they buy from you or not. And a lot of people think this is why we've got to remove the barrier of it's all about the order, because it's not. Because, if we can provide a great experience, if we can unlock an incredible buying experience for our buyers, regardless whether they buy from us or not, if they don't buy from us but they've had a great experience and we've helped them, we've educated them, we've helped them at a point that's going to improve their business, they've got contacts, they've got suppliers, they've got customers that I get some of the best referrals I get are from people that aren't my customers, that don't buy from me straight away, right?
I think that, and to your point about, the great customer experiences, oftentimes sellers wait to ask for referrals until the system's been, whatever they sold's been installed and it's referenceable. It's like, no, I always ask as soon as I get the order.
I sometimes ask you in the prospecting stage, right?
Because they know at that point exactly what you're doing. And do you know anybody else that has similar requirements to you? Ton of leads that way over my career.
Yeah, I mean, and as we know, getting referrals is the best type of lead, because it comes with an element of trust already, right? There's a level of trust because they're passing your information or somebody else's information to you. But again, that comes back to that focus on the role of a sales professional versus a salesperson, right? And there's a certain code of conduct. There's a certain element of respect and principles that we need to uphold. And I think if we can continue to focus on that, then we're going to give it the best shot to be the best we can be. But I also think what can sometimes drive the negative aspect of selling is when people have a lack of pipeline, then their mindset goes out the window, or not even, maybe probably the wrong term goes out the window, but they then forget about the fact that to help people, they're only focused on achieving their objective. And you know what? I can feel their pain, right, Andy? Because if you're not getting target, right, if you're struggling to make sales, it can have a detrimental impact across other areas of your life, right? You might not be able to get that commission to pay for the kids' school fees or pay for your mortgage, whatever it could be. And so then it can be quite a challenging experience for them. And so, of course, they're going to focus on the outcome. But ultimately, when we change the way in which we approach our prospects and our customers, and we're focusing on our needs, we're not focusing on our customers' needs, and that might not deliver the best buying experience for them.
No, not at all. Well, so here's another thing to the buying experience. I think that's a mindset. Again, knowing there's two ends of a mindset, is that, and I think this is sort of collectively, we as an industry, as a profession, do a disservice to sellers, is we focus too much on persuasion instead of influence. Focus, persuasion is about getting people to change their minds. Influence is about helping them make up their minds. And I think as a seller, you want to be in a position of helping the customer make up their minds about how they want to solve their problem and how they want to achieve their desired business outcomes. And if you're focusing on persuading them in that environment, then you're just focused on you and what you're selling, not them and their problem. And I think this is one of the biggest things that sellers are confronting, that they don't know about it, but it's a problem, is they're trained, hey, we're going to train you how to persuade people to want to buy your product. And then you see books like Catalyst by Jonah Berger that was published earlier this year that talks about, research shows very distinctly that everybody has a built-in resistance to persuasion.
Mm.
So isn't it funny that as an industry, we spend billions of dollars a year training people how to persuade, which is the one behavior that every single one of our buyers hates. So how are we helping?
Yeah, and you're so spot on, right? Because when you ask people, when you go into a crowded room and you say, right, who likes to be sold to? There's not a lot of people that put their hand up, right? But who likes to buy? And a lot of people say, well, I like to buy, right? And I get you actually spot on. Like, I shouldn't have to persuade you. If I've done a really great job in asking some questions, it helps you crystallize your thinking as a buyer.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It goes deeper. They've come to, they've moved beyond the obvious need. They've moved beyond the emerging. We've actually helped them uncover some unrecognized needs. So we're creating value even before they buy, right?
Exactly.
So they're going, this is great. And then we help them just to determine, well, what's the commercial benefit? Well, the commercial benefit's higher than what I'm going to pay. So the actual outcome is there. And we're facilitating them to say, well, and that's what I love about The Perfect Close from James Muir, because it's seeking them to say, does it make sense for us to move forward? And it's a very simple process, right? If we've actually helped them realize the potential of change, because that's the biggest, component of the sales process that we need to help them through, they've got to be committed to change, because they're not, unless you're selling something transactional, but most of the time, even transactional, but most of the time they're buying change, they're buying the outcome, right? They're buying the future state. And they've got to be committed to change. They've got to be committed to get. This is why so many people drop off from gym memberships. I've done a lot of work in the fitness industry, and the reason why they have a lot of attrition, right? They have a lot of churn because people aren't actually committed to the change that they want to achieve. And so, no matter what you do, if they're not committed to it, they're just not going to achieve it. So, that's why I don't. I had this conversation with somebody earlier today. Closing techniques, like why should we be using closing techniques? To get a person to make a decision, if there's a business case there that's compelling for them to take action. And if the business case is not compelling, then we haven't done a good enough job helping them realize the potential of the decision they're about to make. And that's on us. That's not on them.
Yeah. Well, I think I've another way that I look at it, and I've looked at this way throughout my entire career, and it's interesting that I've subsequently read research that sort of substantiates this, is that buyers really basically have two motions they go through in buying. I mean, there's a lot of minor steps in this, but basically two motions. First motion is, how are we going to solve our problem? Mm-hmm. And the second motion is, who are we going to solve it with? This first motion, the how phase, culminates in a choice. The buyer always makes a choice. They formulate options. We do this in every decision we make in our lives. Mm. We formulate options for how we can, for that decision. Could be to solve a problem, could be where we're going to go. And then we choose the option that we think would be best for us to accomplish our objective, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Well, that's what happens with customers. Our customers is, to your point earlier, if you're doing a good job, you're engaged at the point, what you do is you help them define what their problem is they're trying to solve. You help them come to a better understanding of that. That's value.
Yeah.
They then formulate some options for how to solve their problem based on what they've learned so far. They then choose the option that makes the best sense for them. Mm. Now, oftentimes when they do that, the customer does that, makes that choice, is that then put it in an RFP and put it out to multiple vendors and say, please bid on this. And that's when you have an RFP that you look at and it's like, oh, yeah, this has Luigi written all over it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's what you want to accomplish. That's sales, is you want to be the choice.
Absolutely.
You want to be the chosen option. And then this whole idea about closing and to your point about the business case, the customer does the business case before they choose the option.
Yep.
And that step from being them deciding how they want to solve it to who they want to solve it with, if you're completely persuasion oriented in your mindset, you're not engaging with the buyers oftentimes till they're deciding on a vendor.
Correct.
That's too late. They've already decided how they want to solve the problem, and it ain't you.
Yeah. And the other thing that you've put there, right, the collaboration component, I think we often forget about this. And this is the mindset. We're going to go back a step, right, because you just mentioned something, if they go to RFP. Now, if you're a sales professional and you've conducted the relevant research, you'll know if the company has a procurement policy that says anything over X needs to go to market, right? You'll know that by the research that you've done, okay?
Mm.
And if you don't know that, and then you've done all this work and they go to RFP, then you're not preparing yourself for success, right? Because through that collaboration process, you would have learned exactly what their buying process looks like.
Sure.
And so I think we often, again, we think, yeah, I'm persuading. If I'm persuading, I'm not collaborating, right? And collaboration is key. It's not about me selling to you. It's me sitting side by side and designing an outcome that's going to help you achieve your goals. And we're doing it together because we're a partner. And that's
right.
that's one of the characteristics of a sales professional, that we're partnering for success. And that means we're going to sit side by side and we're going to co-create this incredible opportunity that's going to help you achieve your objections. And I'm going to help crystallize. And I'm not just going to, tell you what you want to hear, but I'm going to challenge to some respect and provide insight and value, and share some things that you might not be aware of, because I have that level of expertise as well, right? And I think that's a completely different mindset to that one. I'm here to persuade you and put the pen down on the paper and say, Benjamin Franklin.
Press hard. There are 3 copies.
Yeah. Which one do you want to take? I think that sort of stuff there, and it still happens. I'm perplexed that these sort of techniques are still happening every day.
Because they're taught widely. The vast majority of salespeople still act this way. And I said that's the disservice that we do to them by not giving them the right perspectives. Because, we train people up on skills every day, and we have industries that are pretty good at that. But if the skills aren't applied with the right perspective, if you don't have the right heading on your compass, you're going to end up off the mark. And people really need to understand, as sellers, really need to understand what they're trying to accomplish, and they want the buyer to choose them as the solution to their problem. And then it happens all the time. They go through competitive buying situations or multiple vendors. Whether you call it an RFP, a final specification, a requirements document, one always exists.
Mm.
But
Absolutely.
did you influence the composition of that? And if you're too late to the game because you're just focused on trying to get an order, you're always going to be fighting for second place.
That's right. And that's where, again, I go back and say, look, the discovery element of the sales process is always the heart of it, right? Because that's where we really understand, I love to ask, past-based questions, because it can help.
What type of questions?
Asking questions about the past.
The past, okay, yeah.
Because it helps you determine, people go, BANT and all those sort of techniques, and, are you the decision maker? And personally, I answer those questions, right? But understanding how they've purchased previously it provides an indication of how they'll purchase in the future and how they purchase. Mm-hmm. That allows me to really understand about the different stakeholders that are required, and then help them really. And that's, go back to that strategic selling book from Miller Hyman, right? Knowing the buying hierarchy, having your appraisal summary set out, knowing the org chart, knowing who's required to help, bring this solution to a point of outcome. And the other thing, Gartner, I think, says, what is it, 7 to 9 or 7 to 11 buyers in every sales process now, right?
Yeah. Well, I think I think they suffer from stakeholder inflation, but yes.
It's a good one, stakeholder. I like that.
Yeah, because yes, undoubtedly there are more stakeholders involved in decisions, but this number jumps by leaps and bounds nearly every year, which is not really what's happening.
Yeah.
But the basic lesson is the truth that more people are involved in decisions because there's more people involved in certain disciplines within companies that have the expertise. But yeah. Yes, you got to know who the stakeholders are. But I mean, here's a perfect example, though. Again, of another one is, and I actually spoke at a summit yesterday about discovery, which is my favorite topic to talk about because it's so underutilized as an effective tool for establishing influence with the buyer. I mean, discovery is the best tool to do that.
Absolutely.
But again, another just issue about mindset and perspective is when you talk about the various stakeholders. So what are they thinking about? Most sellers, it's like, well, okay, we've got this persona that's been written about these various stakeholders. And so I'm going to ask this person these types of questions that, elicit sort of their answers about these types of concerns that typically have, which is all well and good. But I think this harkens back to something we talked about right at the beginning but the person you're talking to has something personal at stake. They have a business thing at stake. And so everybody looks at every decision from two perspectives, from what's it mean for the company or the enterprise or the team? What's it mean for me personally?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you don't uncover that during discovery, and then you're trying to do as you talked about, how do you shepherd or mobilize the stakeholders in your direction? If you haven't bothered to ask those questions, do you think it's not important?
Yeah,
that's problematic.
But what you're sharing with us, Andy, is a 2-day training program cannot enable you to know this sort of stuff, right? Or a 2-week induction does not enable somebody to learn this stuff. This is experience. This is about somebody like yourself and myself who's taken the time to be deliberate with how we develop our skills. And through experience, we've been able to understand this stuff. And, you look at a doctor. I mean, what does a doctor do before they go from, they've got to do 6-8 years of education, and they've got to do an internship before they can actually start to, the process is a long process, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But we expect sellers and go, okay, come and, do a 2-week induction, and then we'll do a training program, and here's the personas, and maybe here's a playbook, and off you go. And we'll give you our most expensive capital, which is our customers, to deal with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just go, we'll do a sales kickoff once a year, right? That'll fix the problem. But we don't actually respect that it takes time, and it takes a constant focus, and it takes experience as well. And this is where coaches and leaders are absolutely crucial in the process, because we're there to help guide our sellers through this process as well. Yeah, we're there to help guide, and because we've been there, we've seen it before. But that's where I go. Like, this is why I love the art of selling, is because no matter how good you get, there's always another 1% of learning that you can go through, right? You've always got another opportunity to enhance the process. You've always got something that you might not have considered. Right? I've absolutely loved the last couple of years. For me, I'm like you, Andy, that the discovery is the most important part of the process. Most of the biggest projects I've done, the biggest training project I sold was nearly $20 million in Australia and New Zealand, training over 4,000 people. And it was an unbudgeted investment. They did not have the P&L for it. They didn't have it in their budget. And so, that's why BANT is one of the most challenging, for me, methodologies, because the biggest programs I've put together were never budgeted for. We always have to go and seek.
But that's always the case. That's why BANT is such a myth, that, and there was a study done on this, it came out sometime in the last 7 years, 6-7 years, something like that, that said that, only like 21% of sort of, I don't know if this was specifically IT, but sort of major capital expenditures were specifically budgeted at the beginning of the year.
Yep.
Because somebody came, like you, and built a connection with somebody, established some credibility and trust, and then started asking them questions about what the challenges were, what they wanted to accomplish, and built a business case around it that made it compelling enough to say, yeah, let's do it. And when you got something like that, they always have the money. This is something that I think most salespeople don't understand, is when you make that happen, your customers always find the money.
Yeah, it's funny. I've got one of my old clients from 10 years ago, News Corp. Obviously big conglomerate as well, right? Did a big project for them, and the executive general manager, who's become one of my closest mates, we actually ran the Chicago Marathon together in 2013. but one of the things that he taught me from that C-level perspective is, of how he built the business case internally and how he would then put in the buyback, because he would, incredible investment in capital for print machines,
Sure.
You're talking, huge investment. And he would have to do like a 3 to 5 year business case to demonstrate, hey, this is what what the buyback's going to be over a period of time. And that stuck with me quite early. I'm like, well, that should relate. That's how the business is making these decisions. And sometimes they don't know how to buy the solutions that we sell, right?
Rarely, right.
So we have to also help guide them and help them shape, because many people don't buy the things that we sell. Many people don't buy CRMs, every month or every year.
They don't.
They
don't have a process for it. Yeah,
correct. So how do they need to go through that? Maybe they need a bit of education. Maybe we need to share with them what the process looks like for others and the journey they went on, and what they need to consider, and some of the challenges they might see when they go through the implementation, so that we can make them aware about that before they even go down this path of making the decision. So I think there's a whole element, but again, taking it back to what I said earlier, Andy, is this is not something that, and this is having that attitude and that mindset of being the apprentice, is tackling sales every single day with a mindset that I have so much to learn today, that regardless what happens, if people buy from me or they don't, I'm going to win at the end of the day, because I'm going to take away incredible learning from every sales interactions I have. Now, does that happen to me every day? No. There are some days where stuff goes wrong and I'm blaming the world, right? And I don't find the opportunity in it. And that's why, for me, the focus every day that I try to have is to say, okay, it doesn't matter what goes on. I'm really going to try to get the positive out of these sales interactions. And if I don't, I need to go back a step and say, well, why didn't I take the opportunity of learning from that particular example? And Kian McLaughlin, I think you've had Kian McLaughlin on your...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I like Kian.
Love Kian, right? I had the privilege of working with Kian on some pretty cool things. And his whole premise of win-loss, right? There's a real learning in every single aspect of the sales process.
Yep.
And I think, anyone listening to your episode today, the one thing that I'd like them to take away from this is, having that mindset of an apprentice, of always be learning, and that no matter what happens, if we take that mentality and that attitude in, we're going to be better today than we were yesterday. And if we can get better each day, then we have a great opportunity to achieving what we want to achieve in our sales career.
Love it. All right. Well, that's a good way to end the conversation. Thank you for wrapping up so neatly. So Luigi, if people want to connect with you, how should they do that?
Yeah, so I try to be active on LinkedIn. Luigi Prestinenzi. I know it's a mouthful, but
Prestinenzi.
Yes, so big AC Milan fan, and we won't go down.
I was going to say, if you want to capture Luigi's attention, talk soccer.
But I've got my own podcast, the Sales IQ podcast, which I'm really passionate about, and I've learned so much in that journey. It's actually helped me be a better sales pro. So please find me there on LinkedIn, and that's probably the two best places to engage with me.
Perfect. All right. Well, Luigi, as always, a pleasure to talk with you.
Mate, Andy, absolute pleasure. Thanks again for having me on. And also, Andy, thanks for the contribution that you make to our industry and our community, mate.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. I tell people, doing things like this podcast are ultimately very selfish endeavors, because, I get to talk to really smart people like you, and we've done close to 900 episodes. And so I've talked to almost 1,000 really smart people and learned a ton. So, make sure you listen to Luigi's podcast, and we'll look forward to having you back on this one.
Thanks so much, Andy.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. As always, so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank my guest, Luigi Prestinenzi, for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thank you for that. And thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.